Winter 1968. In the cold waters of the Pacific, Soviet submarine S-247 was on patrol duty. Captain Dmitry Volkov, an experienced 38-year-old officer, commanded a crew of 98 men who had been at sea for 15 days. Due to other submarines having mechanical problems, they were forced to extend their mission. As the tired captain tried to rest in his quarters, he heard a terrible explosion. Rushing to the corridor, he saw red lights flashing and alarms blaring. The crew was running in panic. The submarine began tilting to its side. The pressure in his ears indicated that S-247 was sinking. Water was rushing in like walls. Captain Volkov made a desperate attempt to reach the bridge, but escape was impossible. The cold waters swallowed him too, and S-247 silently continued its journey to the ocean floor, carrying its deadly nuclear secrets into the abyss where it would rest for decades. At the Naval Observatory in Washington, Navy deep submergence expert John Morrison was carefully examining sonar data. The 40-year-old Morrison was one of America's most experienced names in submarine recovery operations. In May 1968, he noticed that the Soviets were conducting large-scale searches in the Pacific. Fishing boats, warships, and submarines were concentrated in a specific area. Morrison knew why. They had lost something. American sonar systems had pinpointed the exact location of Soviet submarine S-247. It lay at 177,000 feet deep, 1,500 miles north of Hawaii. Most surprisingly, sonar data showed the submarine was in one piece. Morrison excitedly wrote in his notes, S-247 intact. This was a golden opportunity for American intelligence. Soviet nuclear secrets and code books were waiting there. The race to reach the submarine first had begun, and Morrison knew this discovery would change the course of the Cold War forever. In Los Angeles, Marcus Stone, engineering director of Global Marine Company, was briefing young engineers when his secretary panicked, saying 3 mysterious men had arrived. The 41-year-old Stone was a master in marine engineering. 3 men in suits entered the office without introducing themselves. Their leader, Robert Sterling, said he worked for the CIA. They refused to show identification. Sterling asked Stone an unusual question. Is it possible to lift a 2,000-ton object from 5 kilometers deep? Stone was initially surprised, then thought it might be a submarine. That night at home, he browsed through naval books in his library. Soviet submarine weights matched exactly. When Sterling came the next day, Stone had his answer. It can be done. These 3 words would mark the beginning of the most expensive covert operation in history. The CIA officially brought Stone into the project, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge the limits of human engineering and ingenuity. At the CIA's secret base near Los Angeles, Marcus Stone and his 2-engineer team examined submarine recovery plans in a green-covered book. They worked for hours in the unventilated room. CIA engineers' ideas were ridiculous, using rockets, sending robots, lifting the submarine with giant inflatable balloons. Stone and his team laughed when they saw these plans. None would work. Stone began drawing his own plan. The deadlift method system would involve miles of steel pipe with a giant claw at the end. The drawing looked like a child's fantasy, but Stone knew it was engineering feasible. There was only one major problem. How would they hide a $350 million, 600-foot-long ship in the middle of the Pacific? Stone's answer was 2 words: deep-sea mining. This would be the perfect cover story. Now they just needed to build this damn thing. The challenge ahead would test the limits of 1970s technology and human determination in ways never before attempted. In early December 1970, Marcus Stone went up to the penthouse floor of a luxury Los Angeles hotel. 2 security guards searched him at the door. Inside, Global Marine representatives, 2 CIA agents, and Hughes Tool Company's lawyer sat at the table. Stone's stomach was churning because involving one of the world's most unpredictable people in this difficult operation was his idea: billionaire Howard Hughes. Hughes was ideal for the perfect cover story. He had been involved in mining and drilling for years. Global Marine already bought drills from his company. He was famous for risky ventures. The only problem was Hughes's strange behavior. Once he went to a cinema to watch movies, didn't come out for 4 months, living in the same dirty clothes. Hughes's lawyer kept making mysterious phone calls. Stone was certain Hughes was somewhere in the building, listening to the conversation. At the end of the meeting, Hughes agreed. He would be a front for the CIA and Global Marine. The project's success now depended on one of the world's strangest people. On December 8, 1970, Marcus Stone stepped up to the podium in a hotel penthouse in Hawaii. The room was filled with reporters and project participants, most holding champagne glasses. When Stone tapped the microphone, only a few people knew the project's true purpose. Others would hear the fake story. Stone told reporters, the rumors were true. Global Marine had a major new project. It involved an unprecedented ship, new technology, and deep-sea mining on a never-before-attempted scale. The Hughes Tool president took the podium, announcing that Howard Hughes was the mysterious sponsor of this project. Together with Global Marine, they would extract rare elements from the ocean floor. The ship would be called the Hughes Glomar Explorer. Everyone applauded and raised their champagne. Stone felt uneasy. He had told the world a massive lie, but the Cold War required such games. There was no turning back now. They needed to start building the ship. The greatest engineering challenge of their lives was about to begin. On a summer day in 1970, Marcus Stone was having coffee with his friend John Graham at a neighborhood restaurant. The 55-year-old Graham was an MIT graduate and the company's smartest chief naval architect. He was the brain behind the most innovative ship designs, including the Challenger. As Graham brought his cigarette to his lips, Stone was about to tell him an incredible number. Stone explained he wanted a ship much larger than the Challenger. When Graham asked how big, Stone answered, 35,000 tons, 3 times the size of the Challenger. Additionally, there would be a huge 125-foot opening in the middle of the ship, maybe even bigger. Graham lit his cigarette, saying he thought this seemed like a giant boondoggle. How would they make money? Stone told him not to worry about money. They had very enthusiastic investors. Over the following months, Graham began designing this giant ship, listening to big band music from his constantly playing stereo. In October 1970, Graham's security clearance came through and Stone could reveal the real reason. After Graham's security clearance arrived, the ship design grew wildly. It increased from 35,000 to 50,000 tons. The middle opening expanded from 125 to 199 feet. The most complex part was the giant claw that would grab S-247. It resembled a toy claw, but would have video cameras, sonar devices, and powerful legs to lift the submarine from the seafloor. Stone assigned a quiet, detail-oriented engineer to watch over Graham's shoulder, checking if the technology existed or would exist soon. Stone was seeing the design take shape and soon the ship would be built. Now his only problem was explaining what this island-sized vessel was doing in the Pacific. In December 1970, Stone went up to the penthouse floor of a Los Angeles hotel. 2 security guards searched him. Among those waiting were Global Marine representatives, CIA agents, and Hughes's lawyer. Stone's stomach was churning because involving the world's most unpredictable person in this difficult operation was his idea. The most expensive gamble in espionage history was about to begin. On January 2, 1974, the fully built Hughes Glomar Explorer was at sea off the California coast. Almost 6 years had passed since S-247 sank, and the CIA finally had a real ship to retrieve it. The 619-foot-long ship, with 3 metallic towers protruding from its deck, looked like a floating factory. The weather was choppy, winds were strong, and the ship was rocking. If they weren't pressed by a tight timeline to complete the mission that summer, they might have postponed this trip. But they needed to test the ship's equipment as soon as possible. Stone stood on the railing, above the giant opening in the ship called the Moon Pool, looking down. He could see the large doors at the bottom that kept ocean water out until they were ready. When ready, someone in the control room pressed buttons to open the doors, and water began rushing in. But the ship bucked hard in rough seas, and water filling the pool spilled onto the deck, soaking the watchers. Under the ship, the open doors slammed against the hull, making successive booming sounds. CIA Director William Colby was escorted to the Washington bureau office of the New York Times, where famous investigative reporter Seymour Hersh was waiting. Hersh offered coffee and a seat to Colby in his thick Chicago accent. Colby had only been CIA director for 5 months and didn't want Hersh to spoil the agency's biggest mission. Colby told Hersh he was going to be frank with him, franker than he'd like, because he knew the journalist's work. Hersh interrupted, saying that the CIA director coming to interview him meant his source was correct. The CIA was trying to recover a sunken Soviet submarine. Hersh smiled and leaned back. 4 years earlier, he had won a Pulitzer Prize for exposing the My Lai massacre story in Vietnam. Once he found a trail, he never stopped following it. Colby shrugged and admitted Hersh was right. There was a sunken Soviet submarine, and if Hersh published this story, it would ruin a 6-year mission and waste hundreds of millions of dollars. Colby offered him a better story, a complete briefing after the operation was completed. On the morning of August 4th, 1974, global marine engineer John Parsons was sleeping for the first time in over 24 hours when a young crewman stormed into his room, looking like he had lost his mother. "John, something's wrong. We've lost a lot of weight." Vietnam veteran Parsons was used to things going wrong on difficult missions. He got up and felt the ship beneath his feet shaking. At first, he thought it was an earthquake. Then a worse thought came. Had they lost the submarine? The Hughes Glomar Explorer had been at S-247's recovery site for a month. Over the previous months, they had lowered 177,000 feet of steel pipe into the sea, complete with the giant claw at the end. Unbelievably, the claw had grabbed S-247, and the submarine was slowly rising toward the Explorer. The ship John Graham had designed years earlier seemed to be working exactly as designed. But now suddenly something was seriously wrong. Parsons sprang from his bunk and ran to the control room. When he got there, the room was full of CIA agents and engineers, all staring at the same closed-circuit camera images. At first, Parsons didn't see anything worrisome in the black and white images. He only saw the claw holding S-247 and the submarine slowly rising toward the ship beneath his feet. But everyone except the sleeping Parsons had felt the ship shudder a few minutes earlier. Something must have rammed the Explorer, or it had to do with the submarine. Parsons was as perplexed as everyone else in the control room. But then one of the engineers suddenly swore, and everybody looked at him. "This isn't live," he said, referring to the closed-circuit images. "The image only updates when the camera detects a change. There must be a glitch." Parsons held his breath as the tech team reset the feed. When the screen finally lit up with an updated shot from the claw, Parsons saw what he feared most. The image showed that some of the claw's fingers had snapped, and the claw had dropped at least half the submarine. A large chunk of S-247 was probably already back on the seafloor, unreachable, unrecoverable. This was a major failure. All Parsons could do was shake his head. In Los Angeles, Marcus Stone arrived at the project office to celebrate. He knew S-247's remains were getting close to the surface. 6 years of stressful days had led to this. Champagne boxes were waiting. But when he entered the office, something was wrong. There was no laughter, no sign of celebration. The champagnes were where they were. A staff member told him the first telex message came at 11 p.m. last night. "Congratulations, break out the champagne." Staff had cheered and hugged. But then another message came. Disregard the previous communication. The claw had broken and dropped a big chunk of the submarine. 6 years and $800 million had led to this heartbreaking moment. Still, there was hope. A decent portion of S-247 was still in the Explorer's claw, making its way up to the ship. Days later, the recovery ended. The claw finally came through the open sea gates and entered the Explorer's moon pool. The gates were closed, the submarine lowered, and the pool emptied. Everyone on board could see clearly what was recovered for the first time. It was a disappointing sight. Only 1/3 of the submarine lay in the empty pool. The young CIA engineer suited up in full protective equipment to enter the recovered S-247 section. Surgical gloves, rubber galoshes, long underwear, Tyvek suit, more gloves, hard hat, and oxygen mask. His job was to collect as much as possible from inside the submarine. Even seemingly ordinary items could reveal where the submarine was built. He had received advanced training on Soviet warning labels. When he entered the submarine, he noticed the smell of rust. Items that had been underwater for 6 years were starting to decay rapidly after being re-exposed to air. In some places, the structure looked horribly deformed. In others, it looked like nothing was amiss. He entered an officer's sleeping quarters. Something was under a bunk, he tugged. It came loose and the engineer jumped back. It was a nearly complete human head. Eyes and ears had been eaten by crabs, but skin, hair, and nose were still hanging on after 6 years. In the captain's quarters, he found a journal. The CIA's paper preservation crew discovered the journal contained important notes. The journal was flown to Washington for analysis.